Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. Welcome back to Down to Earth, a series of talks about Islamic concepts. And today, let's talk about the economy. Let's talk about money. In today's world, money makes the world go round. It's all that matters. It's the new religion. We built huge bank buildings to serve the god of money. They run everything. The news are full of whether the market is depressed or the market is happy, whether we need to sacrifice to the market. How can we regain the market's confidence? And all these kind of expressions that tell us that economy, money is indeed the driving force behind today's consumer society. So it's very important that we understand what's going on properly. The economy that characterizes our society is an interest-based economy. It is an economy totally and diametrically opposed to what an Islamic economic system would like, which is an economy based on shared interests and common purpose, common projects, where people get together in order to achieve something, where you have large projects only if many people agree to them, which takes out a large amount of the risk. But these days you can have large projects that nobody wants simply because somebody is there to lend the money for it and wants a return on the money later. And that money, in fact, didn't even exist. It's fictitious money that is being lent. But we get into the detail of that, inshallah, in a moment. Let's first talk about what is interest and why it is such a heinous crime in Islam. Because interest is condemned by Allah in the most strongest terms in the Quran. He says, Allah has declared war on interest. There are other misdemeanors, other sins that Allah did not say He declared war on. He says, stay away from assumptions. He says, alcohol, drugs are the handiwork of the devil. Shun them. But when it comes to interest, He says He has declared war. If you persist, He says, فَأْذَنُوا بِحَرْبٍ مِّنَ اللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ, then expect war from Allah and His Messenger. Interestingly, the interest economy is always a war economy. Because the interest economy is such that it creates a situation where everybody always has to produce more in order to satisfy the added interest. Give you an example. If you were to run a company and your company is doing all right, you make enough, you have enough income to pay all your workers and yourself. That's all you do. You produce something useful, something meaningful. It pays for the people who work. It pays for yourself. There's not much else that you get from it. There's no grand profits, there's no grand revenue. But in normal terms, that would be considered a successful company. It gives something to the community, it provides labor, and it provides goods. In the interest economy, that is a failing company. Because unlike the company that started out maybe with your own investment, in the interest-based system, the company starts out with a loan. And that loan wants to be repaid at an interest charge of between 5 and 20%, depending on the situation. So now it is not good enough for you to have enough return to pay yourself and your workers and the equipment and so on and the running costs in order to produce goods. Now you have to produce all that plus the interest. So you actually have to try, because it's also compound interest, so on everything you haven't paid back, new interest gets added. You have to try to grow. They talk a lot about growth in the modern economy. It's one of the indicators of whether an economy is doing well or not. It's growth. Well, exponential growth is actually a disease, like cancer. If something keeps growing, it takes over the host and kills it. Nothing in life that is healthy keeps growing. It grows until it reaches a sustainable level, and it tries to sustain itself at that. If it grows further, there's a problem. So a company that is based on interest has to actually either pay the workers less, or charge more for the goods, or find new markets. And you can see how then conquest and colonialism, war comes into the equation, in order to also pay the moneylender. Now what usually happens, and it is the same with the housing market, people can sustain it for some time, but when there are difficulties, they might come into crisis and the business collapses. And the moneylender gets what he really wanted, a business. Banks don't want your money. When they charge you interest, they don't want your money, they want your collateral. Because the money they lend you means nothing to them. They know it, you don't. Most people don't. Originally, we need to define money. Money used to be anything by which you could exchange one item for another, a means of exchange. It is also a store of value, and you used to use precious metals or something rare or some non-perishable commodities. You know, if you used apples for money and half a year later you got nothing left, not so good. So it has to be non-perishable. So you could also use grain or... Now, that was to facilitate trade. And Allah clearly says he's allowed trade, but he's forbidden interest. Trade means you exchange one good for another. I'm a dairy farmer, I produce milk, but I can't drink all my milk. But I don't grow dates, and I want to eat them in Ramadan. I say to the date farmer, can I give you some milk and I have some dates? He says, I would, but I already got milk. My neighbor just bought dates for milk. I don't want any more milk. What am I going to do? So by having a neutral item as a means of exchange, it makes these transactions easier. I sell my milk for, 5 ounces of silver. I buy dates for 5 ounces of silver. He spends them on grain for 5 ounces of silver. It makes it easier to trade. However, if this money becomes a commodity in itself, then we end up with problems. This is where interest comes in. When you don't use money just to value something, to measure, or to transact, but you use it and deal in money. I give you some money and later I want more of it because I give it to you now. You get a short-term advantage, but later you give me more back. It tilts the whole economy. But what tilts the economy more is what we call fractional reserve banking. It's difficult to explain all these big concepts in a short talk, but in the old days, the money lenders very quickly tweaked on that people didn't want to travel on their donkeys or camels or horses. loaded with bags of gold or silver, and then somebody jumps on them round from the corner and says, "Stop, stop, 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 what you got on there? Ah, that's nice, I'll have it. I'll let you go if you give it to me." There goes the bag of gold and silver, and he says, "At least I survived with my horse and my life." Not very good. So people didn't like the idea of shifting all that. Lots of cash about. So the moneylenders had safe vaults. They knew how to keep these things safe. Yeah, that was the original job of the bank, to make sure that they have safe deposits. You could put your money there, they give you a receipt, and nobody could get their hands on it until you needed some. You said, "Well, can you take 5 coins out of my bag of gold that I left with you? I need to pay a bill." Sure, sign for it. So these moneylenders firstly tweaked onto the fact that here is the guy, he leaves the whole bag of gold with me, but he comes for 5 coins now, then he wants 10, then he wants another 5, then he puts another 20 in when he has some earnings. He never takes all his money out. I can lend it to somebody else, he won't know. And I can charge him for it and I get rich, and it costs me nothing. So that's the first thing, lending other people's money. Now, if that was bad enough, we go further. Now, your trader is also clever. He says, "I don't even need to go to the bank and take some money out. I just write it over to the guy I owe it to, and he can collect it." Yeah, we have the promissory notes, we call them, so check money, basically. So instead of me going to the bank, taking out some money, giving it to somebody else, he puts it in the bank, I just write him a check and say, "You can draw on my account that much money and put it in your account." Problem solved. And if that guy jumped onto me from round the corner and said, "What you got on you?" I said, "I've got some checks, but they already signed in a name, so if you take them off me, they're no good to me. You can't cash them." Ow. So the moneylender figures out that, that's smart. Now, these people really don't need their money anymore. Now, I could actually also give them a paper that they are entitled to that much. When I lent to people other people's money, I could actually also lend more than other people's money. I could just give them a promise. And as long as I have enough to cover an emergency, if somebody really comes and wants all their cash out because they moved to another country or who knows what, I'm safe. So they started experimenting and said, "Well, I've got 5 bags of gold. I lend to people as much as 50. I haven't got them, but they don't know that. So I can issue money." Now the moneylender starts issuing money. Money that doesn't exist. This is now paper entries. These are book entries. This is fictitious money. He lends money, not just that doesn't belong to him, he also lends money that didn't exist before. He just creates money out of thin air. Fiat money, we call it as well. Fiat, B and it is. So, this is called fractional reserve banking. As long as you got enough to avoid a run on the bank when somebody says, "Oh, I went to get my money and they didn't have it," then everybody wants their money. So, whoa, what about mine? So as long as you can avoid a run on the bank, you can lend as much as you get away with. Yeah? So, this system, of course, over hundreds of years, it evolved into what we have today, where the fraction is no longer, say, 10 times what you haven't got, what is somebody else's deposits, but 100 times. We deal in debt, in derivatives, we have fancy names for new products, but it's all debt finance. We deal in debt. That's what banks do. Banks don't keep people's money safe and charge them a fee for that. They deal in debt. So when banks tell you that they should charge interest because they take a risk. They take no risk because they actually lend you what didn't exist and what nobody has and what they hadn't got. There's no risk in that. It's a win-win for them. So why should we pay them? And then you see when you have like monetary easing, as they come up with these days, so the bank can't meet its commitments because they overcommitted. The government steps in and bails them out to avoid the run on the bank. Where's the risk? There's no risk to the bank. The risk is to the taxpayer. What does the taxpayer do? The taxpayer pays money to the government, so the government pays the bank. We are slaves to the bank. The government could issue its own money as a means of exchange based on the commodities and the ability to produce, the cross-national product and so on, and run the economy that way. Instead, the government goes and borrows the money from the bank that the bank issues. It's fraud. It's legalized fraud. The government that we elect is not running the affairs. The bank is running the affairs, pretending that the government does. Here, our elected government borrows money from the bank that they know very well the bank creates out of nothing, and the government could do it itself, to then burden the population with having to pay it back with interest. Even when they did the bailout for the banks, the government didn't issue new cash into the economy to help people. They didn't pay everybody, let's say, a supplementary wage because of hard times. No, they issued bonds to the banks to then filter it into the economy. This ability to lend money that they themselves invent has given banks immense power. Like I already said, they can support projects nobody wants, big projects. Amongst them, of course, war, because war is very profitable. You get two people to fight each other and you supply both with arms. Wonderful, you sorted for a long time. Never mind people get killed as long as you... There is no... Humanity doesn't come into it. This is why it is so heinous a crime. Drugs come into it as well. That's a way of money laundering, a way of... But let's stay focused. So here we have banks who can create peaks and depressions at will. When they want the economy to do well, they issue more money, they lend more money, they make lending easy. They talk to them, oh, you can't afford that house? Never mind. We'll make it easy for you. You can pay over 100 years. I know you only live 50, but doesn't matter, just go for it. Yeah, easy money, easy lending, economy booms. Suddenly, they call it back. No loans available. Nobody got any real money because nobody can ever pay it back. Economy contracts, collapses. You have to sell your house at a loss. Bank buys it, cheap. Your business at a loss, bank takes it. You put all the effort in, you build it up, they take it. It becomes big multinational companies. All the little enterprises become part of a big company that buys them up, which is run by a bank or an investment company at the top. This is all due to the fact that we use money, we lend money. When you have people in need, you shouldn't take advantage of their need by charging them more. Say, I help you, but I want double back. That is not helping, that is not charitable. That's why Allah says that interest does not increase your wealth, it decreases. Charity increases. And you think, well, if I give charity, if I give money, how does it increase wealth? I just spend some. On simple arithmetics, that doesn't make sense. But in a larger scale, it does. Because money should not, that's why we have zakat, a penalty on hoarding money, or wealth, because actually money and wealth are not the same. Yeah, you pay zakat on wealth, on surplus wealth. We always confuse it with money. It's not money. Money is only a measure of that wealth. However, if you keep all your wealth to yourself, the economy contracts. It doesn't prosper. Nobody has anything to spend. People are able to work but can't find work. People need things but can't buy them. People have things to sell but nobody there to pay them for it. On the other hand, if there is a penalty on you keeping the wealth, then you don't want to pay that penalty, because it's only zakat is not on income. It's not an income tax. An income tax has an exactly opposite effect. It is a tax on surplus. Then you want to spend and get some benefit from that money rather than having to give it away. Now, if you spend your wealth, it means it circulates. You know, if there in a room is a limited amount of air, soon people will fight over it until they all die. You know, you seal it very well. But the air around us that we breathe is freely available, so nobody has to fight over it. And we can all live. It has to be like that with wealth and money. If you spend, then the next guy gets it, and he spends, and the same coin that for you would only be, let's say, £1, buys £100 worth of goods, because you spend it, he spends it on somebody else. It has gone through hundreds of transactions. So this pound actually is worth hundreds of pounds because it's being spent. You withhold it, it's just £1. So charity, spending, zakat, it actually is beneficial. On a larger scale, it increases. Interest contracts because people withhold. You know, it's like hoarding. You know there's going to be hard times. You don't want people to have something. You hide it. You don't tell them you've got it. All these are bad practices in Islam, but profitable, recommended practices, like Soros said, greed is good. That is their maxim, because they only live once for the world. Which brings me to the next point, and that is Islamic economics. A lot of people have tried to put an Islamic varnish or veneer onto the interest-based economy and make it palatable and acceptable and call it something Islamic. So you get Islamic banking, Islamic investment, Islamic mortgages, halal banking, halal investment, but there's nothing halal about it. It's just labeling, it's rebranding. You sell the same product to a Muslim audience, a Muslim clientele who hitherto were hesitant to engage with the interest. And you can use all kinds of technical finesse to make it sound like it's not interest. You call it an annual fixed profit return charge. But if it's an annual charge, it's interest, because the profits aren't the same every year. An average profit return. Yeah? There's many ways of trying, and these ways were maybe very, very clever to convince you that it's really halal. So let's examine these things from a different perspective, bearing in mind that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was not a banker. Point one. He wasn't an accountant. Point two. It's not the technicalities that matter to us, it's the principles. So, let's start by saying that interest is prohibited because it takes advantage of people's needs and exploits them. Because due to the fact that they are needy and don't have the means to, let's say, buy their house outright, and didn't inherit anything, and didn't earn enough, you facilitate it for them, but make them pay for the house 2 or 3 times over. So you profit from their situation. That's the interest-based situation of, for example, a mortgage. By the way, mortgage being French, mortgage, the grip of death. Remember that. There's no halal grip of death. The halal mortgage now tells you that interest is forbidden, but you can have the same product and don't get punished by Allah, because we've constructed it such that there is no interest element in it. And because of that, it'll cost you a little bit more. Never mind. Hang on. This is where the crux comes into it. If the interest mortgage is harmful because it exploits you and ultimately takes advantage of you, profiteers from your situation, and charges you more than you should reasonably have to pay for your house, then a halal mortgage that does not contain interest should be cheaper by definition. It should cost you less because it costs you the cost of your house, plus maybe some administrative costs, plus some recompensation for that somebody had to part with their money over time, but minus the interest. Should be cheaper, should it not? The truth is it is more expensive. If your Islamic mortgage costs the same as an interest mortgage, or even more, then there's interest in it. Must be. Because if the interest was taken out, it'd be cheaper. If it costs more, there is even more interest in it. No matter what you call it. There is more exploitation in it. There is more profiteering in it. It's very simple. I don't care about the mathematical accounting technicalities of how you call this and how you call that, and how you derive at a value that is an interest charge but isn't an interest charge. If it costs more than an exploitative mortgage, it's even more exploitative. It takes even more advantage of your situation. It costs you more. It can't be halal. Simply by that understanding. This is how we have to address these things. We have to think conceptual. If we get lost in the detail, yes, but this sheikh said, that sheikh said, that you could do it like this, and if you did it like that, and then it wasn't interest anymore, you get caught up in that detail and lose sight of the larger picture. The larger picture is interest-based mortgages are exploitative. Non-exploitative mortgages must be cheaper, because if they're even more expensive, they exploit you even more. Hence, they're not free of interest. The fact is, these Islamic mortgage brokers, whether they're Muslim or non-Muslim, because non-Muslim banks sell the halal mortgages as well, they use non-Muslim clearing banks like Barclays and add a percentage. Now, why would I don't have a mortgage because I don't agree with having a mortgage. But if I think the only way I could live is having a mortgage, why would I not go directly to Barclays and buy myself a mortgage than to go to Halal HBSC or go to Halal this and that, or whoever offers me a halal mortgage which costs me Barclays plus 2%? I can leave those 2%. Just because they say we bury your sins on the day of judgment, and they won't. So we are being sold products. Islam is being marketed. This is what is happening now, that Islam is being commercialized. Islam is being traded as a commodity. We want Muslims to become consumers of Islamic-styled products. We don't want them to be real, solid, practicing Muslims who change the world and create a different society. No. We just want them to buy Islamic-styled products. Islamic music, Islamic books, Islamic kitsch, Islamic decoration, Islamic home furnishings, Islamic dresses, fashion hijabs, Islamic mortgages, Islamic investment products. It's not Islam. It's a subversion of Islam. It's turning Islam into something you can profit from, because there are still people who have that sense of belonging and who want to be Muslims, even if they no longer know how to be Muslims in the modern world. And this commercialization of Islam is far removed from what the Prophet ﷺ taught us to do. I said he wasn't a banker. He wasn't an accountant. He wasn't a marketing manager. But that's what we now have. Marketing managers selling us Islamic products, Islamic banking products. They also sell us halal food that is no longer halal. The halal label is just so Muslims would buy it. You even get halal peanuts, you know. You think, yeah, were they ever haram? But you get halal meat that is pre-stunned or electrocuted. Halal meat that is mass slaughtered on production lines. That is reared with hormones, that is reared and slaughtered, totally opposing the method of halal that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ taught, but it's got the halal mark on it. And because we want to consume, have lots of different types of meat every day, and so we buy. Somebody says it's halal is good enough for me, they can carry my sin. I don't have to look at it more closely, I don't have to research, because if I look at it more closely, I find out it's really not good for me, and then I can't eat it, but I want to. The consumer society is that you want and you must have now. And you pay whatever. You pay in money, you borrow it, pay later. You pay in morals, your conscience, well, you bury it. That is the consumer society. We Muslims have lock, stock and barrel surrendered to the consumer society. In the Christian terminology, they would say worshipping at the altar of Mammoth. The altar of Mammon is, not Mammoth, that's the old elephant. Materialism. And materialism and the spiritual message of Islam just don't go together. You can't put an Islamic label on greed. Let's have some Islamic greed. Let's have some Islamic exploitation. You can't. It doesn't work. That's why we have to think concepts. Because if we just look at the label, we just look at the description, we look at the reasoning, the justifications, they all sound so convincing. But if you look at the larger picture, no, you can't. It doesn't work. So the economy is what this key pillar of this society is, something that if we depend on it, if we depend on the debt-based interest economy, and we do now, I mean, the Prophet ﷺ said that there will come a time when nobody can stay clear of interest. If he doesn't deal in it, the dust, the smell of it still reaches him. And yes, you can now not buy a loaf of bread, but there is an interest charge in it somewhere, because the bakery is run on debt. The flour mill is run on debt. The premises, the shop they serve you in is mortgaged. So your bread has an interest charge in it. You pay £1 for your bread, and 20% of it, 30% of it is interest. The economy is crucial to understand how it works, and then to realize that as Muslims, there's no good in us trying to become like them and outdo them so we get richer. So, you know, we also deal in interest, and when we're rich enough, then we introduce Islam. No, it's corruption. You have to try and extricate yourself from it and become independent of it as much as possible. So if we talk about, again, home buying, Muslim home buying schemes, if they're honest, Muslim business support schemes, and some of them exist, where people help each other, entrepreneurs help each other with their cash flow problems, so they don't have to go to the bank and borrow and pay interest, and do it fi sabilillah. There is a common pool, you can dip in and pay back, and everybody can do that. This is real Islam. This is where people manage to get through hard times by pulling together. But competing by opening an Islamic bank and charging interest by another name and profiteering from people's misery, that is not Islam. The interest economy is such that it always has to collapse at some stage. Because, as I said, it's a cancer. Somebody did this calculation roughly that if we valued the money traded in interest, if we took it as gold, if we valued it in gold as a measure rather than fictitious money, then if we said the average interest was 5% over history, and we start from the day, from year zero of so roughly 2,000 years ago, 5% interest on just £1 accumulated, yes, we're talking compound interest, over the 2,000 year span would today be worth 5,000 pounds of gold. 5,000 pounds, one coin, one accumulated interest over 2 millennia. 5,000, not pounds, 5,000 balls of gold the size of the earth. Somebody came up with a calculation. I've never checked it or see if it actually, can be proven or what. But the point is, the sums that you owe eventually are so enormous in comparison to the minute. We're still paying the national debt of the UK, for example, and every country now has a national debt rather than assets. Everybody is in debt. Every country, the national debt of the UK has doubled, tripled, quadrupled. It gets bigger and bigger no matter how much you pay off. We're still paying for the loans the bankers paid to William of Orange some 300 odd years ago. It is unpayable. Doesn't matter whether it's 5,000 spheres of gold or 1,000 or even one, it can't be paid. So what has to happen? Because it can't be paid, eventually the system has to collapse. And then you start again, and they profit here from that as well. So you have to knock down a country like Syria, like Iraq, like you just have to knock them down and rebuild. There's money in the arms in knocking it down, and there's money in the contracts for building it up. And usually the same Halliburton or what companies run both on behalf of their bankers. Now, national debt. Again, thinking big. If every country of the world is in debt, who to? Who has so much money that they lend it that it's worth more than all the wealth of all the countries of the world put together? Nobody. Which proves again that this money actually isn't real money. It never existed. It is just fictitious book entries. It is invented money. It is a magician's trick. Because real money, there is no person in the world who had more wealth than all the countries of the world put together in order to lend it to them all, so they're all in debt. It is a tax on people in return for an empty promise. Like the devil gives you an empty promise and then he binds you. It is slavery, it is bondage, it is debt bondage. One last thing, we talked about gold. There are Muslims who think that the way out of this situation is to go back to precious metals as the only legitimate currency. Go back to the gold standard. Leaving aside that this leaves us back with the problem of the highway robber wanting your bags of gold off you and you having to deposit them with somebody who then lends them on your behalf without telling you. Think for a moment, who owns all the gold at the moment? And whether this transfers power to the Muslims or not, if you made gold the only standard for currency. You just hand it back to them anyway. Going back to the gold standard is not the answer. It sounds romantic. Yeah, we got to just deal in gold and silver, that's the sunnah. It sounds romantic. It is not the answer. Remember that gold and silver were not the only means of exchange at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. Commodities were as well. You could pay in dates. We couldn't change one date for another because that would confuse if it's used as money or as a commodity. And you can't trade in money. But if you bought something else, you could use dates, there are many things that could be used. So the more sensible way forward would be to agree a commodity standard. In a state, if we talk about state boundaries for the moment, so the nation state is a different issue and we might talk about it, but let's just keep it to that limit. In any community, and in fact, in some local communities, they tried alternative currencies, like there's the Let's schemes and others, community currencies that simply work because everybody who becomes a member or joins in accepts it. Yeah? So, if I say, I call my currency the lily, we all agree that, we issue 5,000 lilies amongst us, we distribute them evenly, there's 10 of us, everybody gets 500, we can trade with each other. We put little paper notes, we trust each other. So I can buy your dates for 50 lilies and then you can spend them and buy some work that I do on your house, and yeah. Some communities have done that. All you need is an accounting system. And community spirit, cohesion, trust. Gold is not the answer forward. On a state level, a government having a central bank, if that central bank is not subservient to the commercial banks, can issue its own money based on a basket of commodities, so we then know what the value is, because if the productivity in the country goes up or down, the currency gets devalued or increases in value accordingly, but you have a standard, you have a stable currency that reflects the prosperity of the nation. Perfectly all right. Perfectly Islamic. Even if gold is never mentioned in it. Perfectly Islamic because there's no interest element in it. So we have to really think new systems. This whole Islamic banking movement has been a betrayal. This whole Islamic banking movement and investment banking, Islamic investments, has not been anything to solve the problem of us suffering as everybody else does from the interest-based economy. And if we manage to spearhead a movement that frees us from this yoke of slavery of the banks, and do that for ourselves and for other people, I tell you, the non-Muslim majority of those countries in the West that we Muslims live in will all want to become Muslims if that system is available to them. If they had to become Muslims in order to be part of that just system, they would want to become Muslims. They don't want to become Muslims just because we imitate and copy them and we say, we can sell you the same product a little bit more expensive, but we put the halal label on it. Nobody wants that. They're not that easily fooled. Nobody's that easily fooled. That's why it's not succeeding. Why should I pay more for something just because somebody pretends that it's different when it's the same? So the way forward is, as I said in the outset, that if we want to build a strong economy, if we want to support projects, only by agreeing and working together and trying to remove from the bankers and their subservient governments the power to control us through fictitious money that is the only money that they permit in order to transact, and by which they control us and which they can pull in and out as necessary. I mean, it's getting worse because soon cash will be out of the equation. You only use electronic money transfers, only cards. Probably get an implant in your palm so you can pay. And then they say, oh, we don't like this guy, he's involved in suspicious activity, we block his account. And your palm suddenly think, I got some chip in there, but it's not working, what am I going to do? I can't buy bread, I can't buy milk, I can't... Yeah, there is control. The control of money means the control of people. And if we want to be Muslims and be independent and free and sovereign, we have to extricate ourselves from the control of the usurer, the banker, who exploits our needs through charging interest, rather than by competing with him in also wanting a share of that illicit gain. We talk about, I think, science next time. As already today we've seen that sciences can be misused. We trust accountants, but some accounting is just cooking the books. We trust their calculations, we trust the technical explanations like this is Islamic, this is halal, but we find it actually isn't when you look at it conceptually. So maybe we need to take a closer look next time at how science works and what real science and what pretended science is, and science as a religion. But for now, Jazakumullah khairan, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.